So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the sixth in the series of our Roundtable Equity Talk series. Today, we're going to be talking about research and practice. My name is Neha Kumar. I'm VP at large, pronouns she, her. And I look at initiatives that have to do with the global community. So looking at funds and travel grants, and also other things like the community calendar and the Voices of SIGCHI and such. And my interest in research and practice, I would say, so just to mention a little bit about my positionality, is that a lot of the work that I do is very much engaged with communities. And that could be community as in individuals, communities also in terms of community-based organizations and such. And so that's where I'm coming from to this conversation, thinking about what role we have as researchers as we engage with practice. And my co-host here is Vino, and I will ask her to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Vinoba, pronouns her, she. I am an AC for ECTI for SIGCHI, and in my day job, I am a project R&D engineer with the BBC. I'm based in London, and the BBC is an interesting place. We have a research and development department, and we are for public service. And so it's not a not-for-profit organization. Before that, I was with University College London and again in the UK in London for quite a while before I went over to the BBC. So I have, or at least I feel like I have an opinion of what academic life is like, and I kind of feel like I have an opinion of what research and industry life is like, but maybe not for profit industry. So this particular session is of incredible interest to me.
And awesome. Kale is going to be our able moderator for this session.
Perfect. Yeah, so it turns out I'm still Kale Passmore, pronouns they, them, he, him, since gender is fluid and whatnot. I'm coming to you live from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which is unceded Treaty 6 territory, homeland of the Métis and many other First Nations people, including the Saulteaux, Cree, Nakota, Dakota, Lakota. Yeah, and I, as always, will really quickly cover our code of conduct here. There is going to be put in the chat a full link for those of you more interested in that. You can go through it. So while I do, especially since we're a smaller group today, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, get to know one another, make a couple friends. We ask you to provide your pronouns, location, and maybe a favorite paper of yours lately. Yeah, whenever you provide your thoughts or experiences, we ask that you begin by stating your name, affiliation, and pronouns. You can add your pronouns to your username by right-clicking the box containing your face in the Zoom window and selecting rename. This is a roundtable, so anyone is free to offer their experiences, their critiques, their solutions at any point in time. This is a collaborative discussion of issues and possibilities around how research and practice is handled in the SIGCHI context. So the session will be recorded, and by attending this roundtable, your consent is ongoing. Any participation that includes questions, comments, are being recorded, and that includes content posted to the chat. For the same reasons of privacy and consent, we ask you not to share content from the talk on social media. We will post this in full with additional accessibility options afterward. And if posting after the event, hashtag SIGCHI and hashtag EquityTalk will be your hashtags. If you must absolutely discuss potentially harmful, stressful, or sensitive topics, we ask you to provide a content warning. We have with us live Cart, an ASL interpreter, and Miriam doing her brilliant diagrams. If you require any additional services, just message me or another organizer. So we do encourage constructive criticism and critique in this space. Our time together serves to highlight these incredibly complicated interactions between individual experiences and systemic policies. These are often sources of ongoing frustration and oppression for many. While that frustration is valid, I'd like to remind everyone here that we're an internationally diverse group of humans. So be patient, show sensitivity to anyone who has the floor, keep aware of how much time and space you're taking up, and that others may need a moment of silence to collect themselves before speaking. Be critical, but constructively so. Be kind and be supportive. Not everyone comes here with the same education level or culture or background or just privilege of awareness when it comes to social issues, social justice, or matters of identity. Not everyone has equal access through their communities or to this knowledge. There may be times when identifying words or phrases are insensitive or just don't feel right to you. And if these issues come up, I would like to ask you to take each other in good faith, offer a quick correction, and refocus on the topic of the moment. I'd like to remind you all also that people's lived experiences are not up for debate. But in the event of harassment, discrimination, or any other additional needs from an attendee or presenter, just directly message me or Neha, and we can do what we can. So we also have a Slido linked in the chat for posting and upvoting questions, which is just another great way to engage with us. As this event is striving for equitable dialogue and is not a Q&A, we do have to balance comments from the speakers, from the comments from Slido. So any questions we can't address will be up for discussion in the Equity Talks Discord. A link will be posted shortly, and on the preceding blog post. And that is our housekeeping. So we set forth sort of 4 guiding questions for this talk today. The first would be naming the problems, which is what are the challenges facing the intersection of research and practice in the SIGCHI community today? We're also interested in what might a more inclusive and collaborative environment within SIGCHI look like for those engaged in research and practice, honoring those who place research first, as well as those who place practice first, even as they're all engaged in both. What are some barriers to inclusion, participation, and career progression that we might expect to see in this regard? And finally, where does the responsibility for change lie, and how might we create a more inclusive SIGCHI community that encompasses the different attitudes regarding research and practice? What actions can and should be taken to affect this kind of change? So I'll turn things over to Vino as our resident sort of expert here when it comes to bridging academic and industry practice, and then we'll open it up to everyone here.
Thank you, Kale. Didn't know this part was coming in right now. So, as I mentioned, my name is Vinoba and I work for the BBC in the Research and Development department. I started my career in academia, so I was an international student in London. And that means that you have this, you get your student visa and you get a sort of attendance into a university and come over with your international student status, which at the time was a ton of money. And I had 4 years in which I had a placement or industrial placement to sort of carry out. And my first industrial placement was with Philips Semiconductors, and it was doing things like version control kind of thing for software pieces and tools. It was boring. I know there are people out there who find joy in it. I could not find joy in it. And so it kind of put me away from sort of computer science and that sort of thing for quite a while. But I continued my degree, and at the end of my degree, I had this wonderful undergraduate sort of project supervisor called Adrian Hilton at the University of Surrey, and he was opening up a lab in 3D graphics. I did a final year sort of undergraduate project with him, and I thought, this is what I want to do my PhD in. I'm Asian, so my mom obviously told me I had to do a PhD. I just didn't know what I would be doing that PhD in. And so that was how I found out that I would be doing my PhD in graphics, right? And so there was Google has a search engine, but there wasn't much content on the internet that back then, as a lot of you might know. And so I came across this advert for VR with Mel Slater and Anthony Steed at UCL, a summer job. They were calling it sort of communication across the internet, and they were going to test out the thing called Internet 2 back then. And I went over there, and about a week into the summer job, I got the job, and into a week into the summer job, Mel turned to me and said, "Oh, you should do a PhD in VR." And I said, "Well, yes, that sounds like a great thing to do." And long story short, I did a part-time PhD at UCL for sort of 5 years, but I was also a research fellow because I was an international student, and you couldn't, I mean, that was one of the ways to fund international students. You kind of did a job and you got training as well, except your training happens to be a PhD. So I had all the sort of academic privileges that comes with being a research fellow, but I also had to churn out papers. So, there was a mix of trying to find your path as a PhD student and also churn out the papers, because that's what you have to do in order to keep a research fellowship and get another rolling job. I was also given these tasks such as teaching Java to first-year students. I had never really thought of Java as my passion in languages. So teaching that to students was quite a bit of stress. Teaching students also comes with the knowledge that you only make an impact on a certain percentage of students and not all of them. And if anyone has sort of taken care of lectures, you all know it takes like 3 times the amount of a particular hour in order to make that sort of lecture. And you think it's beautiful, you think it's your baby, you kind of go out there to give the lectureship to students, and sometimes you get apathy, and it takes experience to sort of take that hit and continue going on. And I realized that I couldn't. And so shamefully, I started looking for other jobs. And again, didn't know what I wanted to do, but came across the BBC, did not even know that the BBC did research and development. But to my joy, they did. Because it's a public service institution, they did sort of research in things that were good for the public. So right now, for instance, we do research on sustainability and green technologies, and we do it for the purposes of helping the BBC get to a carbon neutral state. I was able to go from things like computer vision and computer graphics all the way to, ways of figuring out how to do HCI in the wild, volumetric capture, mobile phones, how to make companion screens. So quite a lot of things. You are a researcher, you are an R&D researcher, but you're also not a master of all things, but a master of multiple things. And they might not all be connected to the same thing. And so I think there's been quite a difference between industry and academia. And I often think about seesawing back to academia, but again, I don't want to lose the privileges of research in industry. So this has been my sort of experience. And I know that people out there have slightly different ones. So I'm going to shut up and kind of push it out there. What has your experience been, and which ones do you like?
I also, sorry, I know Pejman here is also very well versed in this, and I'm just going to put you on the spot here, Pejman, since you've given me some sage advice at different points on that relationship between an academic practice and industry practice. I wonder if you might share a little bit of the wisdom that you've sort of shared with me, maybe with the just room here.
Sure. Thanks, Gail. So maybe I talk a little bit about my background. I don't have any wisdom to share though. I think I got to do my PhD and I refer to it as a kind of a lucky, I guess, coincidence, because when I started my PhD, my supervisor also started a kind of a startup company. So I was working there, and everything I did for my PhD was part of the project that we worked in the company. I felt I was lucky because I had the luxury to run studies in the pace of what we usually do in industry setup. So I think during my PhD, I ran maybe 30, 40 user studies. And then the luxury part is coming in basically picking maybe the 3 or 4 that I reported in my thesis. And I know it's quite unusual for PhD student to have such privilege. I soon started my tenure track job, but again, I think those experiences to do something in the intersection of industry and academia were very useful for me to find the job that I have at the moment. However, there are some also, I guess, challenges, and I felt that during my PhD as well, because usually when you do 30, 40 a study in that time frame, they don't necessarily reach the quality that we usually expect in academic publication, or depth, or kind of the general topic. Usually that the topic might be a little bit too focused to something that it basically matters for that industry practice. So I had a bit of a struggle, and I still do, because I work a lot with industry still, to make those projects into a publishable format. One thing that helped me a little bit is not to only think about CHI, but also maybe consider other, let's say, SIGCHI sponsored conferences that may have tracks to be, or to allow industry work there. The other challenge I've seen, although my university, they kind of recognize applied research quite a bit and they actually like it, but I've heard from some colleagues that they kind of have a bit of a struggle to convince their dean or their university that, you know, they not necessarily maybe do fundamental type of research, but the applied research, and there is obviously impact and value in that as well. So that's something that I've heard. Again, in my position, I'm quite lucky because my university actually promotes that. So I sometimes need to actually push my faculty towards more kind of fundamental research. But yeah, I think those are maybe the initial intro that I wanted to make. In my current role, I'm Associate Dean for Industry Partnership. So always looking for ways to bring more industry projects to the faculty. But then there are some struggles there because somehow there is a little bit unclear, again, definition of what research is. I actually have this book that I would recommend if you haven't checked, the new ABCs of research. So that's a really interesting book that I could recommend for people to maybe think a bit differently about research and how it may have impact or different type of impact. So I think that's I stopped talking, and yeah, thanks again for this opportunity to be here and speak.
That's perfect, Benjamin. Thanks so much. Susan, I see you have your hand up if you wanted to sort of bring us into different issues or complications involving equity.
Well, so thank you very much, and it's great to be here. I think many of you might know that one of my passions, well, my passion is bridging. It's always bridging between North and South, academia and industry or practice. And I think Nick made an extremely important comment, and I'd love to hear more about it, when she said that in many ways, this research practice thing is really a North privilege kind of thing. Because when you are in settings, and I'm not going to speak for Nick. Nick has great experience, and I hope you'll share it, Nick. But I know that in the settings that I've been in the Global South, you have to really understand both practice and research, because it's really critically important in order to do good research to truly understand how practice is being influenced too. In my work, I've been primarily a consultant, a researcher for hire, and worked primarily in for companies around the world. And as a result, my experience in academia is limited. I'm an adjunct professor. I've done lots of lecturing. I mentor a lot of people, but I'm not an academic. Although it's funny because the people in industry think I'm an academic and people in academia think I'm an industrial person. And I really just I'm neither. I sit in the middle between. I think that one of the things that has always bugged me is that researchers, my experience of researchers is that there is a perceived hierarchy within SIGCHI, that researchers are really important and practitioners really aren't. And the things that really matter are papers at CHI, case studies. Nobody even goes to those things, And yet I think that if we are really going to succeed as a profession, we are an applied profession. Without practice, research is really, frankly, mental masturbation, to use a bad word, I suppose. It's who cares? But without having a grounding in what is good research, what is good work, understanding basic principles, et cetera, that come from research, practice is charlatanism. So somehow we've got to figure out a way, and we still haven't. And, we've been talking about it for a long time, but we've got to figure out a way to kind of work together better. I did a talk in Seoul. My Lifetime Practice Award talk was all about building bridges between academia and research. And in that talk, I won't go through all of what I found. You can find it online. But there's so many differences in how people in industry work and people in research and academia work that I think we have to look at those and figure out ways to address those so that we can actually build those bridges. And they're myriad. I mean, they include time and who are the people that you work with and all that kind of stuff. But I think that it's important for us to find a way, if we really do want, if we want practitioners to be part of the SIGCHI community. And there are not a lot of us. There are some, obviously, and there are wonderfully some who have multiple backgrounds. But, if we're going to really include people from a more practitioner perspective, if we're going to, for instance, find ways to work with people from UXPA, the User Experience Professionals Association, et cetera, I think we really have to be honest about what could SIGCHI bring to professionals or practitioners or industrial people. What could we bring, and how can we make it less toxic to be part of the community, less like you're always going to be a second-class citizen, always. I helped to found SIGCHI, and I've always felt like a second-class citizen because of that. And I will shut up.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. I see Nick has her hand up, and then we'll turn it over to Elizabeth.
Yeah, so thanks, Susan. I mean, I think I might have got practice a bit confused, but I think actually my confusion might be really helpful. So when I was thinking about, I don't know how to do practice in rural, do research in rural communities, what I was thinking about was the NGOs that I might work with, the guy that knows how to, who works for a telecom company and therefore gets involved in a community network on the ground in order to do sort of action research. And when I write that stuff up, it comes out as if it's sort of like these facilitators, these access points, are somehow bridges, but not an integral professional part of the actual research, right? Because that's the way that we talk about it in the main. Oh, we work with Oxfam, and Oxfam are an ability to connect ourselves to an audience, but not necessarily seen as people who are highly expert in technology themselves. And so that's what I was sort of thinking. I was really thinking of UX in industry. I was more thinking of the people that are integral parts of action research in ethnographic action research in my projects, but are actually highly skilled people, but are treated as sort of subsidiaries in a way, because perhaps that's how it works in the global north or in academia in the north. But it's not how stuff actually really gets stuff done. So you might be working with health workers or something here, or community people who are good at digital storytelling or something, but they are actually really good at some component of the UX themselves, right? So I don't know if that helps, but I find it difficult to just to partition things here. I'll shut up now, but yeah.
No, I think that's great. There are these inherent embedded questions of who one works with, how one works with them, who that knowledge is working for. But before I start rambling, Elizabeth, I think you wanted to add something here.
Absolutely. Thank you. So let's see, for those of you who don't know me, Elizabeth Rosenzweig, I'm the director of World Usability Day and a volunteer in many different things, including, I just want to build one comment on what Susan was saying about UPA, UXPA, and SIGCHI and practitioners. So I would consider myself actually in both camps. I'm adjunct faculty at Brandeis, and I'm a consultant on my own. So I actually am in academia, but as an adjunct and doing research, most recently with a pharmaceutical company, interviewing patients and doctors about cognitive assessment. So like, I feel like I was on the front lines, literally talking to patients. And yet there's really no place, I feel like here at SIGCHI, for me to talk about that kind of work. And UXPA has sort of gone in a different direction. So to be honest with you, I feel almost like an orphan. And my hope is to use World Usability Day as a way to bring us all together, because I honestly think our pie is pretty small to be cutting up into all these little pieces. And I just don't see us making progress. You know, I've been a member of SIGCHI maybe since it started. I think that's where I met Susan and then UPA. And, you know, I just don't think that we have the time or the resources to be like deciding one of us is better than the other. I think I'll leave it at that. It could go on for a long time, but I'd like to let others talk also.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Deborah, you have your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I have to leave in 2 minutes, but I really like the discussion, and I was about to write to Susan because it's a topic that I'm so interested. I'm a practitioner, and to be paid. I'm from Brazil, and to continue being a practitioner, I had to join academic world to get paid, because in Brazil, to be an activist, it's impossible to be paid. So I have this conflict of being an academic, and I would like to think, how can a paper be evaluated not only for what is written, but what was done? Because many times we have a beautiful paper written, but actually there are many damage caused in the community. Or maybe you do not write so well, but then you do a very beautiful work back home or in your community. So yeah, this is a topic that is very dear to me, and I thank you for this opportunity being here discussing, and I'll be paying attention to the next meeting. I know that the time is a bit different for me.
Oh, that's great. And you point us to, yeah, finding ways create systems around measuring impact or understanding role and purpose of the knowledge work that we do, which is something, you know, I've encountered in my own sort of trying to figure out practice versus academic research, and what are called deliverables are so different. But in both contexts, I see, you know, there is little measure of like, what is the effect of that knowledge work that's done. I wanted to share a comment that Vino had put in the chat, which was that some conferences have industry tracks and demos, which truly bring an interesting side to the experience. Increasingly, a lot of organizations are, in some fields at least, developing tools at such a rapid pace. Working together can help boost each of those spaces. Yeah, so with a few of the things that have come up, whether it's, you know, social impact of the knowledge work, the distinctions between maybe like what one context wants versus another, how do we not hierarchize our knowledge work? Is there anything else that participants here can identify as issues, cite as examples of sort of addressing some of the things that have been brought up? Susan, yeah.
Sorry to be a hog here. One of the places this becomes really evident is in the awards. And we had to fight for a very long time to get a practitioner award that was like the research award, because and to have practitioners accepted into the CHI Academy. That was not the way it was in FIRST. And in fact, I wrote to Ben Schneiderman at one point and asked about this, and he said, you'll never be in the academy because you're not an academic and it's for academics. And that was pretty much the way it was. So Arnie Lund and I really pushed a lot to get practitioners into the academy. We also had to push hard to get a lifetime practice award in addition to the research award. And now we're seeing something similar in the social impact award. The social impact award is awarded to people who study impact or whose papers have had impact in the academic community. But people who've actually impacted the world, who've made significant changes, who've started, you know, areas in outside of the US, for instance, who have you know, had an impact on the educational system of a city or whatever, those people are not considered worthy of a social impact award. And to me, it seems like that is an issue. Now, I realize that's just an example, and there's all kinds of stuff about awards that we don't need to talk about. But I think that is something that's just, it's a marker that kind of demonstrates it. And I will try to get the chip off my shoulder, I promise. Oh, and I'm Susan Dre, she, her, hers, and I am on I live in Minnesota, which is the land that we have stolen from the Lakota and the Dakota, sorry, and the Ojibwe.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Susan. Yeah, and I think that chip is well earned at this point, for what it's worth. Vino has added in the chat, to add what Susan said of awards, this also translates to career achievements. Gaining tenure in US academia has been compared to 15 years of industry experience, industry practice.
Oh, I think that we lost Kale.
Yeah, I can finish off that, or maybe not.
Kale
have
is
you gotten
back.
back? We have gotten
Yes.
back. Do you want to finish off, Kale?
Go for it. And I think Neha is next here. Sorry for the internet cutting out.
So yeah, I was just adding that in terms of what career achievements and progression means as well, I've been in conversations or comments that sort of take achieving tenureship in US academia and comparing that to 15 years of industry practice. And because I am in industry, I totally disagree, of course, but I do wonder where this perception comes from, especially if you've not done both of those things as well. It just doesn't really hit with me at all.
I had no idea that that was a mat. I'm going to keep that in mind. Okay, so I wanted
Neha.
I want to bring up what I heard. This was a really inspiring kind of conversation that I heard that Melissa was a part of, and this is also why I really wanted her to be a part of this conversation. This was at Africa a few months ago, where the conversation was about research and practice, and this was about, you know, when we go to conferences. And by the way, I also want to say that we did an inclusion survey about a year ago, and one of the findings there was also that there were a few folks who said that because I'm a practitioner, I feel like I matter less at CHI. And so there's this sense of, you know, is there really room for people who are practitioners at places like CHI and other conferences? And how do we create spaces for that participation to be more valuable? Because, and the comment that Melissa, that I was referring to, that she made was, that if we, you know, we need to have people from industry, people from practice in the room for our research to be, you know, for us to have the right audience for our research. So I'm obviously paraphrasing, but Melissa, if you wanted to build on that, I'm going to let you do that.
I can't remember what I said, but I think it's to the effect of, like, if we're not relevant to practitioners as researchers, then we're not relevant. And without them in the room, number one, it means that we're not pitching something relevant because they don't feel the need to be there. And then, you know, if we don't make spaces, I think there's just so much we can learn. And so in my work, I do a lot of work with a number of different kinds of practitioners, right? Like there's partners that we that know kind of what's on the ground, help us to identify research participants, have domain expertise, have some design expertise, maybe does UX in practice. There's actually like designers, like software designers and developers that are doing what we do, but like not these short sort of just researchy things, but they do a bunch of marketing research, they do a bunch of implementation, and then they live with their implementations in software and everything for years on end, which we don't necessarily do as researchers. And there's, you know, also a range of UX practice people, and I think relationships with each of them is really different, but all of those perspectives are really essential to be able to do participatory design, to be able to do co-design, to be able to do, you know, contextually relevant work. You know, I think that's just one thing I want to say. The other thing was like reflecting back on that AfriCHI panel that we did. We had practitioners and researchers all on the panel together. And what really struck me about that conversation at AfriCHI, though, was almost Nick's point, where we had framed that conversation as industry research and academic, not industry research, industry versus research, whether it's academic research or industry research or whatever. And so like that practitioners in industry versus research practitioners in industry versus academic researchers. And I don't know what that framing is, but it felt really weird at AfriCHI because actually, you know, a lot of, at least even my work, isn't about partnering with industry. It's often about partnering with communities and organizations and that kind of practice. So then how do you bring this, how do you bring everybody to the same table? And for me right now, I've just said, okay, I'm doing webinars, and I'm doing webinars where I'm mixing up everybody and trying to foster conversations. But we also do, how do we do it at conferences? And you know, I've talked to Susan about this before, about how that like plays out at CHI. I know for like Dev and Compass and AfriCHI, we've tried different ways to bring kind of UX practitioner and practitioner viewpoints on HCI into the room. And part of it is like, you know, industry practitioners, UX practitioners don't necessarily have time, budget, whatever, to participate in a $900 per person conference registration fee, the 6 days of Kai. So for Compass, not Compass, for Dev in Bangalore, I remember one of the things I thought was really cool was Bill said, okay, practitioners aren't paying a registration fee. We asked them to come for a poster session where they each kind of have a chance to present their posters and meet and network with people, which is what they wanted. And we have it like up against the student poster session at the same time. Hello. Should lock that door. And then the practitioners are there for a very specific set of time. What I really liked at Dev 2016 was they just organized panels of practitioners to come talk to us, and they made sure there was a practitioner giving a keynote. And so, you know, creating spaces for voices that are aligned with how they engage in industry, aligned with what they're sort of permitted and encouraged to do in a work context. And that requires, you know, almost participatory co-design of what these spaces look like, where we include practitioners in that conversation. And I think this, in theory, this equity talk is a space where that can happen. Yeah.
That's great, Melissa. Thank you. Yeah, and I really appreciate the pointing to sort of like critical participatory design. I'll turn things over to Eamon. If I'm saying your name correctly, please correct me if I'm not. Nope, you're on mute.
Yeah, I got it. It's cool. Yeah, no, it's Ayman. I'm David Ayman Shama. Let's see, he, him. I'm an industry research scientist currently at Toyota Research. And I'm currently one of the 2 TPCs for Kai 22, which brings me here. I wanted to touch back a little bit on Melissa said, and more so on Susan. I think, you know, one of the smaller conferences at Kai is IMX, and they do a nice thing with their industry talks, as Vino dropped into the chat. But actually, the last time I went to one in person, they had like an industry day. So the people participating in the industry, there was the demo session and a set of the industry talks, and it was all compartmentalized into one day at a lower rate if you just wanted to be in industry to drop in on the day that typically you are if you're not normally someone who can block off 4 days for a full conference. And so the people who were there for the full conference could interact, and the industry people got the networking they wanted, the presentations they wanted. So it was a nice structure. It doesn't work at all scales, but it worked for IMAX really well. I did want to circle back to something Susan said about the awards and the sort of like the getting representation. And I want to thank you for that fight, Susan. I wasn't aware of that, and I was on the EC previously, and the arguments happen, and you make friends and you lose friends, and these things are very difficult. But and I wasn't aware of that lifetime practice and lifetime research and now social impact, and I was kind of following it, but I didn't know the history. One thing, and I want to point to, is maybe we can turn to our parent organization, which is the ACM here, and take a page as what I see happening there. Of the member grades, there's ACM fellows, and then there's distinguished, and then there's senior. And of the distinguished grades, previously there used to be groups. There used to be distinguished scientist or distinguished engineer or distinguished educator. And recently, and I think as of maybe this year, I've noticed that's gone away. And so now there's just distinguished members, and they just assign everyone. And your contributions can be engineering centric or educator centric or research centric, but they no longer label it as such. They're just all distinguished members. And so it might be interesting to think about, what would it look like if, for example, if even with the SIGCHI awards, if they were just like lifetime achievement awards? And yeah, you could get one for practice, or you could get one for contributions of research or for contributions of social impact, but we're not like labeling them as specific verticals to say, well, this one's not like that one because this doesn't have that, but that has this other thing. More so, it's just a generalized recognition and then we could sort of, just move in that. And maybe it's something to look forward in SIGCHI to take a page from what ACM has done with the distinguished member grade.
Fantastic, thank you. Christian, I see you wanted to make a comment, and then we'll turn it over to Vino next.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Christian. I'm a professor for interdisciplinary informatics at the Helmholtz University of Applied Sciences in Germany. And the name of the university already points to the type of university that deals with both with industry and academia. Because in Germany, we have universities and University of Applied Sciences, which means that if you would like to be a professor at the University of Applied Sciences, you need to have at least 5 years of industry experience. If you are going to be a professor at the normal university, then this 5 years you actually spend in doing a second PhD, so pure theoretical research. And if you would like to have PhD projects at the University of Applied Sciences, you need to back a professor from the university to be your co-supervisor in order to be able to have PhD students. So industry experience is rated much, much less, and it's a hierarchical relationship. And sometimes it's even feel that the professor at the university is selling his or her soul whenever he or she collaborates in a PhD program with the industry. I would just so there's just one idea that came to my mind for the next SIGCHI conference, which hopefully will not be virtual, but we will see all in a room together. So why not apply our own methodologies to this process? So doing co-design or participatory design with the local chamber of industry or local chamber of commerce, bringing them to a workshop at the conference, at the SIGCHI conference, and work together with them in order to come up with new categories, new formats, new sets of motivational factors, whatever might fit both of us, in order to then implement this in the next SIGCHI in the regular program. So we are discussing right now from an internal perspective, trying to see how we can get industry people more involved, but we should work with them together, bring them together into a workshop and actually discuss it with them together. And then having the results of that published in a panel during the conference, so that you have a much stronger connection between whatever is done at the workshop with whatever you can present then to a broader audience, because that's something that I feel in SIGCHI is missing at SIGCHI as well, that you have a lot of wonderful discussions going on and a lot of insights during the workshops, but there's a missing connections between these great discussions and the broader audience at the conference. This might be a combined format, having a workshop combined with a panel. Within the workshop, people could vote on who would present the workshop at the panel. And this could be an industry research workshop and an industry research panel where all these results would be presented then over there. So just as an idea that came to my mind.
Thanks so much, Christian.
Can I interrupt, Kale? Sorry.
Yeah, please.
Our website will be up in a matter of weeks, and that sounds like a very interesting set of two submissions for a workshop and panel. And so if anyone wants to organize and dive in on that, I'm sure our venue chairs would love it.
Great pitch. Vino, the floor is all yours.
Damn it, Diamond, I was going to turn the floor over to you and say, we've got a TPC member from next SIGCHI. We should totally get him to do something. So apart from that, I think so way back in sort of for SIGCHI 2020, which got canceled, us, Microsoft and Snap wanted to do a workshop bringing academic teams, so a professor or a lecturer with a team of 3 to 5 students. They would work on a AR thing that we would sort of scope out for people. Snap was funding it. And the idea was that we would bring at least 40 people to a workshop in Kai. It was a done deal. Like, you know, you would get the income, you would get the sort of interest, and you could go for it. But Kai said no. And this was not a formal pitch. It was sort of an informal chat to see if they had any interest. And it was a complete no. So hopefully future Kais would be at least open to the idea of having something slightly different. They came to IMX in the end, which is the conference that I'm general chair for at the moment for this year. And IMX, Pablo Cisa was the general chair in Barcelona. It went virtual. They had it, and we had like 90 people over a Zoom call talking about AR. It was an incredibly well-attended conference, and a lot of networks that still carry on this year as well. In fact, that creative challenge is rolling on this year. I wanted to add to what Ayman was talking about in two phases. One was the awards thing, and then the other one was the IMX industrial thing. The IMX industrial day and that sort of thing, we wanted to create it back in 2020, this year for 2021, but a lot of people were finding it really difficult to understand that the industry track would not ask for the same research rigor that people had come to associate with a lot of the larger conferences. It isn't. I mean, if you look at the industry track itself, it just asks for like a presentation of, you know, a piece of work. It doesn't ask for too much. It asks for simply an idea, a proposal, and then you come and give a talk about what you did. But I think the perception is already sort of strongly held, and it's really, it takes a little bit of education to work through that, I think. So the same thing goes for the awards as well. One of my fears of sort of combining the separate lifetime awards into one sphere is that the program committee or the committee of awards choosers, if they happen to all be from academia and they don't understand anything that's going on, you're not going to get anyone winning other than the old traditional academic people that you already understand. And this is not a fault in any way. It is human nature, but I think you need to have sort of a diversity and representation, and you need to have awareness of an understanding, at least, of what each brings to the table, and a way to fairly compare them before we can start thinking about, hey, let's just have one lifetime award and not have it. I think, in fact, maybe that was what was there before, and they were trying to sort of solve that problem by separating it out into three, right? So.
No, it's a great point. Thank you, Vino. Yeah, the chat is just lighting up right now with some great comments. Nick has added, is the dirty word of applied research to do with not wanting to admit academia is part of the same economic system that might be distasteful to some? Or is it about some classist model of the workers versus the intellectuals? Melissa added, practice also equals industry. It's much broader and includes communities, NGOs, governments, liminals/access points, multinational institutions, etc. Christian added, it might come down to a simple power struggle and people being afraid of the unknown. And Neha added, yeah, also we produce so many PhD students, and most of them, I think, end up in these practice spaces, at least in our field. We should really not be creating these hierarchies. Melissa added, crafting papers is not how most practitioners share knowledge, which I think is a great point and brings us back to, you know, a lot of the epistemic inequalities and epistemic differences we've been discussing throughout the series. And Elizabeth says, yes, ultimately we need both practitioners and researchers and a balance between the two. And that's how we can build bridges and make the world better for all of us. Nick, you've raised your hand. Just before I turn the floor over to you, we have about 5 minutes left. We're going to continue on for about half an hour after this of unrecorded space. Yeah, and so Nick, if you can be a little brief, that would be fantastic.
I'll try and be brief. I think that might be a possible key, sorry, dog, key to the bridge, which is about how, picking up what Melissa said about communication. So we actually have this scenario at the moment where lay people often distrust scientists and academics and so on because they don't understand our papers and so on and so on. Whereas industry people often, or practitioners, whatever form they are, NGOs or whatever, half of their deal is about being able to communicate to that wider audience in order to get to them. And I suppose I'm just wondering, filling away here is, can we not give a little bit more respect for that ability to communicate to a wider audience that academia sorely needs right now? So yeah, I think that there's something in that that could be a possible way forward in thinking, rebalancing things.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I hope we can pick that up in just a couple minutes here. I wanted to just state that as an accessibility note here, we'll have to say goodbye to our captioner and interpreter who have done an amazing job. And thank you so much for keeping up with fast-mouthed me. We've not had any accessibility requests, so hopefully the auto captions will suffice for the section that follows. You can also join us on our ongoing Discord. That a link has been posted to chat for. Yeah, and I just wanted to thank everyone who has offered their experience, their wisdom, their knowledge so far. And yeah, to just thank our organizers and aides. So Neha, Xiaowin, Vino, Adriana, Stacy, Soraya, Teresa, Elena, Miriam, Sophia, and Robin. Is there anything else that we'd like to add just before we close off the recorded section here, Neha or Vino?
Join Discord.
Perfect. Then, yeah, I guess we can just keep going here unless anyone minds. I think there has been...
Should I turn off the recording now?
Yeah, I think you can.
Okay. Oh, before I turn off recording, I should remind everybody to vote and turn off the recording now.